Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of Right Stuff International. I am so glad you're here with me today. We are going to be talking to an author all the way from Taiwan. I'm so excited to talk to her. Her name is Annie Douglass Lima. I have known her now for a few years, and I'm so excited to showcase her book, The Collar and the Cavvarach. It was one of her first books that I read by her, and let me tell you, she is a wonderful author. I'm so excited for you to meet her today. If you want to know more information about her, all you have to do is go to her website down at the crawler below, and you see it there. It's on blogspot.com. So Annie Douglass Lima, blogspot.com. I'm so excited to showcase her on the show today. As always, we showcase Christian authors all over the world, and Annie is no different. I'm excited to share with you her experiences, her life, and everything else. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest co-host and contributor today, Annie Douglass Lima. Annie, I'm so excited to have you, and how are you doing today?
Hi, Parker. I'm doing great, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. This has been a couple of weeks coming, and I'm just so excited because you're all the way in Taiwan. You've lived in Taiwan for a number of years now, and it's just exciting to showcase you. We talked about maybe a few years ago, but now we have an opportunity to talk and see each other face to face, which is one of the reasons why I love doing Right Stuff International. We can see our authors face to face. So, really excited to showcase you to our new viewers out there for Right Stuff International. So thank you for being with me today.
My pleasure.
I am excited for people to get to know you. So share a little bit about your background, how your travels have impacted your writing career.
Well, I've traveled to a total of 21 different countries so far, and I've lived in 4 of them. It started with my growing up in Kenya in East Africa, and then later I lived in the United States and also Indonesia, and now my husband and I have been in Taiwan for about 13 years. So living in and traveling to different parts of the world has certainly impacted my writing in various ways. I love getting to know other cultures and learning about the differences and similarities between them. And in one of my books, for example, my fantasy novel called Prince of Malorn,
Yep.
the main character, Prince Coram, had to get to know a new culture when he traveled into Malorn's impassable mountains to seek the help of a tribe known as the Mountain Folk. And in the kingdom of Malorn, mountain folk and those they call lowlanders tend to distrust each other and they avoid contact whenever possible. Both sides claim that the other mistreats them. And I wanted to show that often it just takes better understanding to lead to acceptance and appreciation of another culture. That and the willingness to learn new ways of doing things and respect others' customs even when they're different. And then another example is that a few elements of Taiwanese culture from where I live now have managed to work their way into my Krillonian Chronicles series. The Collar and the Cavvarach is the first book in that series. So even though those books are set in the imaginary Krillonian Empire, there's still bits and pieces of Taiwan in there for those who know what to look for. For example, some characters chew betel nut, which is a mild narcotic that's sold legally here in shops decorated with colorful flashing lights. Another detail is that when money is awarded as a prize, it's always given in a red envelope. And New Year is the most important holiday of the year in both places. So a few little details like that now are part of the Krillonian Empire as well as Taiwan.
I find it fascinating that all of that comes from just traveling all over the world. And that surprises me because the more you get to learn about a different culture, it just adds more richness to your own life. You know what I mean? And just from what you were saying, I just find that amazing. So my next question has to do with writing in general. So what's the best part you like about writing?
There are a lot of great parts, but one of my favorites probably is the intensity of trying to pound out a story in a month. Now, I usually draft my books during November, which is National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, and most of my books are about 100,000 words or a little more. It's always my goal to finish the whole rough draft, the whole first draft of my book in that month. And it's not easy to write 100,000 words in 30 days while teaching full time, which is my day job. So I have to get up really early, stay up late, and I have what we call word wars with other authors, often to help each other stay focused. And it's such a thrill at the end of the month to be able to look back at the manuscript and know that I did it. Of course, then comes the long process of all the editing. But that first draft is just really fun with the intensity of it all.
I wanted to go back to Taiwan real quick. What's it like living in Taiwan? I would love to know because I have a friend that lives over there, but I haven't talked to him in several years. It just kind of fell out. I would love to know what it's like over there.
Taiwan is great. I love it here. After 13 years, it's definitely home for me. Well, it was home within the first couple of years, really. But the people tend to be very helpful and welcoming to foreigners like me. The food is amazing. It's much better than so-called Chinese food in the States, which is not usually authentic. And right. I really like the culture. And although we live in a big city, there's lots of beautiful scenery around the islands, just some great natural beauty. One downside is that the weather is humid and hotter than I'd prefer for most of the year, but you can't have everything. It is a great place to live.
I don't like it when it's too hot. I don't mind it when it's cold. So I probably wouldn't do well in Taiwan because I don't like to melt at all. Okay. I don't like to melt. I always have this really morbid thing. I'd say if I had to choose how to die, I would probably freeze to death, but not that I want to choose how to die. I want the good Lord to do that. I don't want to do it myself. I was joking with someone the other day and I said, I always have this weird paranoia about a serial killer taking me out, and I said, and I was like, well, what if I tell the serial killer, you're not in God's plan to take me out this way? You know how writers do. We just have weird stuff that we focus.
I'm sure that will convince him.
Yeah, maybe that'll help. You're not doing God's plan, Mr. Serial Killer, to kill me. We'll see what happens. But anyway, sorry, went off tangent there. So, what do you do when you're in Taiwan? What's your day job or what's your day ministry? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I teach 5th grade in an international Christian school here called Morrison Academy. And in my free time, I write young adult action and adventure novels. That's pretty much what I do.
Now, are your kids the ones who help you understand, give you that feedback when you need it? I know some of your kids read some of your books too. Does that help you out with making sure the book is readable to the kids that you are writing to?
Yes, absolutely. I always read at least one of my books out loud to my students every year. Usually, if I have a work in progress at the time that's not yet published, I often read that because it really helps me to get their feedback and see what works and what doesn't. When they start to yawn or try to talk to each other or play with things at their desk, I know that scene needs to be more interesting. And when they're so intent on listening that they don't even notice the bell for recess, or when they say, "Oh no, we don't want to go to recess, please keep reading," then I know I've done something right.
That must be phenomenal to have that instant feedback, because I've always been told, and I know for a fact I used to be one, kids are brutal. They will let you know if it's not good. Matter of fact, I was watching Just Desserts, Zumbo's Just Desserts on Netflix, which is like a baking show. And they had the kids come in and they had to make cakes for the kids. And the kids, all the contestants were like, oh my gosh, kids are brutal. They're going to be so honest. And one of the times the judges asked the kids, hey, what do you think about this cake? It's awful. So, but you got to love it because kids will toughen up your skin. Everyone says in this game, you need a tough skin as being a writer. I assure you, children will give you one. They will definitely give you a tough skin.
Yes, they will.
Speaking of that, tell us a little bit about your writing journey.
Well, it started when I was a child. I've been writing for almost as long as I can remember. But when I was about 7 years old, I had a sudden inspiration for what I thought was an amazing story. And I decided then and there that I was going to write a book and be the world's youngest published author. And I ran to my bedroom in great excitement, found an old notebook and a pencil, and started in. And that first little science fiction story was never actually finished, let alone published. And it wouldn't have been any good anyway, but it got me started. And after that, I can't remember a time when I wasn't working on at least one book throughout my childhood and teenage years. And again, most of them were never actually finished. None of them got published. But Prince of Alasia, which I began in college, was the first book I wrote that actually did get published. And Yeah, it was quite a thrill for me to finally fulfill my childhood dream. And now I've published a total of 21 books. And with one of the recent ones being science fiction, I've finally come full circle.
That's awesome. I like the fact that, you always have had that thing inside of you about writing. I know for myself, I feel the exact same way. I can't remember not having a love affair with words. I can't remember a time when it wasn't there. And you know how you said there were books that will never see the light of day. They'll never see the light of day. And I'll be honest with you, no one believes me because I have not released it to anyone but the precious few. But I came up with Twilight way before Stephanie Meyer did. But my vampires didn't sparkle. They didn't sparkle or glitter. My vampires were actually half vampires. But like I said, it'll never see the light of day. I enjoy it as I look back on my writing career and say, oh my gosh, I'm glad I've grown over the years. I used to
Right.
being a vampire is understandable. I know exactly what you mean. Like, they're just meant to encourage me. These failures or these mistakes are just meant to encourage me. So yeah. So you talked about how you've always been writing. So of course, this is one of my favorite questions to ask because authors really have a different way of getting it done. So are you a pantser or a plotter?
Oh, I am a diehard plotter. Absolutely.
Ah! Be still my heart. How could you be a plotter? I'm a pantser. We can't be friends. I'm going to end the interview right now. No.
But yeah,
But tell us about it.
I outline each of my novels usually about 3 different ways before I even write the first word. That's usually how I spend my September and October, is doing all my outlining and prep. And I plan out all my characters in great detail. Now, there are still surprises along the way because the characters don't always want to do what I think they should. And to be honest, their ideas are usually better than mine. But so changes come along, and I don't always stick to my outlines 100%. But I couldn't write a book without that kind of structured pre-writing. And actually, all the novels I started writing and tried to write as a kid, I didn't know at the time about how to plot out your story ahead of time. And I think that's why I never finished any of them, because I didn't know where the story was going, so it went nowhere. But now that I know how to plan it out ahead of time, my stories go places.
It's interesting because I'm a diehard pantser, but pantser isn't really, like, in the truest sense of the word, it's not really a pantser because then you wouldn't even know how to start. But most pantsers have a general idea of where we're going. We're going to make a story about a fairy and a dragon. That's what we got. That's what we have. But then the details kind of fill themselves in. But there is something to knowing where you're going. Like, I get lost in the closet. So there's something to that. There is definitely something to that. So that brings me to the book that we're highlighting today, which is called The Collar and the Cavvarach. And I remember reading this book. I was telling Annie before the broadcast, to our viewers out there, I remember reading this when she first published this. That was several years ago. And she published it, I think, on her website or some kind of online medium. It may have been a contest or something. I can't remember, but I remember reading it chapter by chapter and really enjoying it. So now that The Collar and the Cavvarach is in audio book form, which she'll tell you a little bit about that a little bit later on, it's good to, reintroduce it to people and let people know more about it. So I'm going to go ahead and have you tell us what The Collar and the Cavvarach is all about.
Okay. Well, first of all, the genre is a little hard to pinpoint. It's an action and adventure novel, but people ask me, is it fantasy? Is it science fiction? It's kind of hard to say because it takes place in a different world, but it's one that's almost exactly like our own. There's no magic or advanced technology, but the political system is different. It's an empire. And although most aspects of the culture are a lot like they are in the United States, there's a few differences. For example, I created a martial art that doesn't exactly exist in our world, known as Cavvarach. But the main difference is that slavery is legal in this setting, in the Krillonian Empire. It's not based on race at all. But the main character is a teenage slave named Benson, who earns money for his owner by competing in this martial art, Cavvarach. And he enjoys doing that and dreams of winning the most important tournament in the Krillonian Empire. But his main goal in the story is to secretly arrange for a way to have his little sister Ellie freed before she can be sold to someone who will abuse her. And there's no legal way for him to do that. So he's, forced to look into less than legal means. And it brings in all sorts of danger and adventure throughout the story.
One thing about it is that you used a very unique premise where slavery is legal. And I remember when we talked about it before, this aspect was just highly fascinating to me. Because if you are not used to seeing something as wrong, and if it's legal, usually if something is legal, that must mean that it's right. But that's not necessarily the case,
Yeah.
And I like that beautiful murkiness that you put into the story. I know from some of us here, we're like, oh my gosh, this is awful, but they're used to it. They're used to living life like this. And I really enjoy that aspect. I think I remember you even talking about it in one of the writers' groups because you were plotting, you good person, you're a good plotting, you were plotting this. And I thought that was a fascinating element of that. And a lot of people understand that we say what slavery is wrong, but if you never knew slavery was anything but what it was, would you think that way? And it's in this world that our characters live. And I remember it was like our world, but different. It was an empire. The political structure was different. So I definitely remember that. So now this is book 1 of this series. So how many are in this series?
Either 3 or 4, depending on how you define it exactly. So there's a trilogy that follows Benson's story. Book 2 is called The Gladiator and the Guard, and book 3 is The Student and the Slave. But then I also have a 4th book, which is a separate novella called Emperor's Heir. And it takes place in the same setting, but it features different characters. So you could argue that it's part of the same series or not, I guess.
It's almost like it's in a world, like an inner world thing. It's in the same world, but not of the series, because you've created this world. And one of the cool things has been to see this series grow. I remember every so often you have a new book in this series. I said, wow, this looks amazing. And the covers are killer. I love these covers. They're very minimalist, gray tones to give you that sense of melancholy, but it's mixed with like the sharpness to them. So the covers are phenomenal. I'm going to show the cover again. There's a cover, the collar, and the Cavvarach. But if you notice, all the covers in this particular series has that same feel of, like I said, minimalist, sharp, gray tones. It's a lot of murky stuff going on. So yeah, the covers of this are just phenomenal. Who is your cover artist, by the way? I'm just curious.
For that series, his name is Jack Lin. He's actually a graduate of Morrison Academy, the school where I teach here in Taiwan.
Oh. Keep it in the family. Keep it in the family. I love that. And so, watching this series grow, how has that been like for you? Because you started off with one book. I don't usually think you plan to make several books. I think you just write as a story comes along. So what has that been like for you?
It's been really fun. Now, at first, I only planned for the one book. I just thought The Collar and the Cavvarach would be a standalone story, and it can stand on its own. But as I neared the end of that book, I started thinking of a dangerous situation that Benson could be thrown into a little later, and the next 2 books developed out of that idea. And then Emperor's Heir was actually almost an afterthought. It started with a very clear picture in my mind of one particular character, and I built the story around her personality.
I like the fact that as a writer, you get to live in this world. And I think that's one of the cool things about writing is that this is your world. This is your loosely God complex. I think every writer almost has one, because we get to treat our characters like we want them. And there's nothing they can do about it. But unlike God, who gives us free will, our characters are predetermined. Like you're not going to go off the path. And then sometimes they do. And so you're like, you know what? I got you. That's what you say to your characters. I got you. So yeah, totally understand that. So another thing about it is that you're now venturing into audiobooks. So when you put The Collar and the Cavvarach in the audiobooks, tell us about that experience.
Well, that's been a fun journey too. But to be honest, I was actually hesitant to even look into the process at the beginning, because anytime that I've ever heard anyone read out loud from one of my books, I've never been satisfied. They never read it in a way that sounds right. I think it's because I've read my own books out loud so many times to my students in different groups. I know exactly how every scene and character is supposed to sound. And as far as I'm concerned, nobody else ever gets it right. So I thought there's no way I'd be happy with anybody else reading my books. But I really wanted an audiobook, so I decided it couldn't hurt to at least put it out there and see if I got any auditions and see what I thought. And sure enough, when I listened to the first few narrators who tried out on the ACX site, it kind of felt like I was hearing nails on a chalkboard. That's how much it just bothered me. But then I heard one audition that literally made my mouth fall open in shock and delight because it was exactly right. And I never thought anybody could read from my books in a way that I would feel was exactly right, but he did. And that was the talented Joseph Baltz. And I was very excited when he agreed to narrate my book. And he's actually working on book 2 now, and he's agreed to do the 3rd one after that. But meanwhile, the audiobook of The Collar and the Cavvarach is finished now and available. And I'd encourage you to look it up on Amazon and listen to the free Audible sample and see if you don't agree that Joseph did an awesome job.
I remember how I felt when my first book was put in audio. I used 316 Audio Production Company, and it was phenomenal, particularly because I had accents in my book. And in an abstract way, I was fine with that, but I didn't have to read it. You know what I mean? I wasn't reading it. I cannot do an accent. I don't know how to sound French or French Creole. I don't know how to do that. The only accent I have is a broke one. So that's what I would say. But it's really cool when you have your book in audio and have that different medium. And it's just fascinating to me. Now, I think you mentioned about how the kids respond to your book, but how have other readers responded to The Collar and the Cavvarach?
The response has been really positive. I've got a lot of great reviews for that book and no low ones. And it's just fun to see how much people enjoy the story and the characters that are so near and dear to me. But one thing I've always enjoyed is as I see my students getting to know my books on their own, apart from whatever I read out loud to them during the year. My books are in the school library, so they often find them. And it's kind of interesting sometimes when I catch a student sneakily reading one of my books behind their desk at school when they should be working on an assignment. And you can imagine then the teacher and the author sides of me struggle with how to respond to that.
That this is bad. But I'm feeling some type of way. Like, this is bad. I'm pleased, but look, put the book down.
Yeah.
If you want questions, I'll talk to you about it later, but we're talking about this now. I love that. I think that's the best compliment. And that brings me to my next question, because you wrote these characters. So who are your favorite characters?
Well, I mean, every author has to say that all my characters are special to me in different ways, right?
I know, right?
Kind of like asking a parent who their favorite child is.
Yeah.
But I do have some that are particularly special to me. In The Collar and the Cavvarach, one character who is especially fun to write is actually not even a real character. Now, Steen, who's Benson's owner, is constantly arguing with his conscience over the issue of owning a slave, which he knows is wrong. And he imagines his conscience's exact words as it responds to him, complete with body language. And I enjoyed giving his conscience a little personality of its own. For example, after one particularly lame argument on Steen's part, I wrote that his conscience rolled its eyes and refused to dignify that with a response. But in terms of actual characters, my favorite is definitely Benson. The struggles he's forced to go through make him stronger, and I admire him for his perseverance and his determination to meet his goals and help his sister no matter what. And he's willing to sacrifice himself for those he cares about. While his choices are not always the wisest, he is committed to doing what he feels is right. And society, of course, is against him since he's a slave and has few rights, but that doesn't stop him.
I think that's admirable, too, that you get so attached to these characters that they're actually turned to like people, and those people are people you can admire. I think that's why some writers love to have that connection with their books. And I totally agree. It's hard to say what is your favorite character because they all serve a different purpose. Exactly. And I think that's just absolutely phenomenal. We're at the end of our show today, so I'm really excited about that. But before we go, I want to let other authors know what services you provide to authors. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, I have two. First of all, I'm a proofreader, so I don't advertise this service very much because I don't have time to do it very often between my teaching and my own writing. But you could say I'm obsessive compulsive about finding and fixing grammar errors, whether they're in my own writing or other people's. So it's satisfying to me to proofread people's manuscripts and help them fix what isn't right. And I also have what I call my book submission services. So if an author is planning a special promotion where their ebook will be available for free or for 99 cents, they can fill out a form through my blog, and I'll submit their book's information to a list of up to 28 sites that promote free or discounted books. So it's a simple little service designed to save authors a lot of time, and it only costs them about as much as a cup of coffee.
Sorry about that. I had had a little technical difficulty there. No, but I like the fact you offer those services, and I can let our viewers know that I have also utilized those services, and it's very easy, and she does a great job. So go ahead, utilize her services. I'm not just saying that because I have to say that. This is not Bugs Bunny where it says, and the Warner Brothers pay me to say that. It's not that at all. So I really use her services there. You know, in the few moments we have left, Annie, I want you to really encourage those authors out there whom God has given the gift to write. You know, this show is always about showcasing Christian authors all over the world, like we're doing today, you know. And I want you to encourage those authors out there whom God has given the gift to write to pick up the pen and do so.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say, I mean, I know from experience that it can be frustrating if you have a scene in your mind or a story in your mind and you feel like you just can't write it as well as it needs to be written, and it can be tempting just not to try because of that. But my advice is don't try to make your writing perfect the first time through or get frustrated if it doesn't turn out as well as you've hoped. Just get your ideas on paper in whatever rough form you need to or on the screen. And never mind selecting the perfect words or fixing any mistakes. And then leave the scene alone for a few days or the story alone. And when you come back to it, read through it, smooth out the obvious errors, and repeat this several times. And if possible, read it out loud to someone, because that will help you hear errors or issues that you might not notice just by looking at it. And that's what I do. I found that it usually takes a lot of passes before I'm satisfied with something I've written, but I would never be satisfied if I tried to get it just right the first time through. Trying to make it perfect the first time is ridiculously time-consuming and stressful, and at least for me, it's next to impossible. So don't give yourself that kind of pressure. Just let yourself write with whatever quality comes out, but don't stop there. Keep going back to it, work with it, make it as good as you can. Use online writing resources, other people as resources, and you can get it hopefully to a satisfactory level in the end. So that would be my advice to the writers out there.
And that's good advice. I always like to share other authors' ideas of what do you do to make it happen? Because so many people say, I want to write a book, I want to write a story, but they don't do it. And I always think, how do we get to the point where we can learn how to write their story? So listen to what other people do. Your process may be different. Like I'm a pantser, so I pants all the time. You're a plotter. But guess what? We get it done. So maybe you may fall between us. You may be a plantser, we're a plotter and a pantser, it doesn't matter. But as long as you get it done is the most opportune time. So Annie, once again, thank you so very much for being with us on this show today. This is, I guess, our second episode of Write Stuff International. Really glad to have you with me, and just really looking forward to the more books you have. Just let me know, because as I always say to every author, I am in the business of long-term relationships, not short-term flings. So I definitely want to keep showing people what's happened. And since the first time we had you on the show a couple of years back, now you have several books and more books. And I think that's just amazing. So Annie from Taiwan, thank you so much for being with us on the show today. And I cannot wait to have you back real soon.
Thank you so much, Parker. This has been great.
And we have been talking today to Annie Douglass Lima. She is the author of the book, The Collar and the Cavvarach. It's available on Amazon.com. And guess what? If you like audiobooks, you can also get it from Audible or on Amazon as well. I know you're going to definitely love her book. I enjoyed it when I read it online several years ago. So guess what? I know you're going to enjoy it too. And as always, prayerfully consider supporting this ministry. You can simply go to patreon.com. We showcase Christian authors all over the world. And get this, we just talked to Annie in Taiwan. Isn't it wonderful how people that God has given the gift to write, how he can use them all over the globe? Is that person you? I definitely want to get in contact with you. And there's all ways to get in contact with me. But if you want to help me with this ministry, again, prayerfully consider going to our Patreon account. You can be a Quill member for as little as $3 a month. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Right Stuff International. You have a wonderful, absolutely glorious day, and God bless.